George and Willie Muse, two brothers from Roanoke, Virginia, were kidnapped and forced to work as sideshow freaks for almost 20 years. They had no choice but to travel the country making little to no money and playing characters that dehumanized and degraded them until something they never would have imagined actually happened. In America's sideshow era during the 1900s, millions of able-bodied white middle-class Americans would pay their money to see disabled people and people with rare conditions be displayed on sideshows as people from other countries are not even human. George and Willie's grandparents were enslaved and they grew up as sharecroppers on tobacco fields in Roanoke, Virginia. Their job was to patrol the tobacco rows for pests and make sure that none of the pests were eating the plants. They both had something called albinism, a rare genetic disorder that causes a melanated person to have less melanin in their hair, skin, and eyes. And they also had something called nystagmus that weakened their vision. A white criminal who won't be named will go around the country and look for new freaks to put in their circuses. From conjoined twins to people with no arms to people who swallow swords. When he ran across George and Willie, he most likely had never seen anybody with albinism before. Their African features with their whiter skin and blue eyes and blonde hair instantly screamed prophet to the white man. And he ended up taking them along across the country, named Eco and Iko and ambassadors from Mars and Eastman monkey men, Ethiopian monkey men, and ministers from Dahomey. They were portrayed as non-humans and the missing link between man and ape. They were bringing in thousands of dollars per show, but none of the money was going to them. They didn't know how to read or write, and their contracts didn't constitute any of them getting paid. The least they got was food, shelter, and maybe some nice clothes every now and then, only for the show. They were forced to do things like bite snake heads off and even chicken heads and eat raw meat. But one day when they gave them some instruments just for pictures, they found out they were actually musically inclined. And Willie could play any song after hearing it only once. Every time they asked about their mother, they were told that she was dead and that they should stop asking. They were black men in America being portrayed as animals from around the world and even from outer space. They had no type of rights that a white man had to abide by, and they had no one to run to. Their mom, Harriet, never stopped looking for them, and she always kept faith that they were alive somewhere. Whenever she told the authorities or any organization that could have helped her, they looked at her as a joke and a black woman who was just trying to get some more money out of the government. Until one day in October 1927, the unthinkable happened. She found out that the circus was coming to Roanoke, and she actually had a dream that her sons were going to be in Roanoke. There's no underestimating the intuition of a mother, and they actually were there. And while they were performing on stage, they dropped their instruments and saw their mother and ran into the crowd and hugged her. Their kidnapper was outraged and immediately came out to see what had stopped his show. He argued that they were pretty much his property and under contract and that they couldn't leave. But when the police came, they actually believed Harriet and their story, and they were able to leave with their mom. The circus actually sued Harriet for her own sons. She put together a team of local lawyers and actually won. This one black woman beat an entire establishment for her son's freedom and eventually was able to negotiate their new contract where they would at least be compensated for their work. One might think that after this traumatic experience and being laughed at and ridiculed and bought and sold for years, that they would never even want to touch a circus again. But you gotta remember, they were poor sharecroppers when they were born, and their parents were still poor sharecroppers. And they were bringing in over $30,000 a show just from these circus acts. Most sharecroppers made no money and they ended up in debt at the end of the year, even though they had done everything that their contract stipulated. With this new contract and actually getting the money from their fruits of their labor, they were able to actually build wealth in America as black men through the circus and send enough money back home to their mother so she could stop sharecropping and buy her own small farm to take care of her and her husband. With their new contract, they now had the freedom to work when they wanted for who they wanted, and their original kidnapper ended up having to leave the field and living the rest of his life as a chicken farmer. When their mother Harriet transitioned in 1942, they sold her farm and bought themselves a house in Roanoke. George transitioned in 1972 and Willie lived all the way to 108 years old until he transitioned in the year 2001. George and Willie are a strong example of the exploitation of black people in America as well as disabled people in America in the name of profit. Instead of rich white people seeing these people and thinking, hey, can we get them some help? Is there anything we can do? They decided to portray them as monkeys and animals from Mars and make money off of them until they couldn't anymore. I believe that in order to rebuild our community, we have to rebuild our education system. And telling the tragic stories of people like George and Willie, and also the strong stories of people like Miss Harriet, who fought to find her sons, are essential to be passed on to our current and future generations to make sure we're going into the world with the right mindset and mind frame. If you want to help me rebuild education, leave a like and subscribe. And if you have any video recommendations, make sure you leave it in the comments. Peace.